There we go. Thank you, ma'am. Okay. I would like to look at a couple things using screen sharing first. The first thing is that I taught this class in person at OSA last fall. And the nice thing about being in a in-person class, and obviously on a Zoom class, but the nice thing about being out in the community and teaching a class is that a lot of times for me, I've been doing things the same way since for like 40 years. And by being exposed to other students who are maybe, more up to date than I am, they tell me about new developments in art supplies and new materials that I can play with. And this is certainly true also in my oil painting classes. So there's a really nice side benefit. So those students told me about, let me share this, let me see, a palette. This is the newest thing for people who do gouache. This could also probably work for watercolor too, but it's not, maybe it might not be as crucial for watercolor. I just ordered this. It's supposed to come tomorrow. So it's a whole $14. So it's not a huge benefit. I mean, a huge expense. You still, in my opinion, need a palette in addition. I think you can um, paint on this lid, but that doesn't look like a very big space to me. So this is a palette where people are putting their paint straight from their tube into the wells. It's supposed to be leak proof, as you can see up here in the
I don't see anything.
you don't see, are you not seeing the share? Okay.
It.
Okay, well, it's good. You need to tell me. That's good. I'm going to stop it.
I was
I can
waiting,
do
maybe
this again.
thinking it was loading
I'm
or
going to
something.
do this again. Okay. See if I can manage. Otherwise, there's something going on that I can't share this from Amazon, in which case I would just, can you see this now?
I see it.
Okay, you see it? All right.
It must
All
be
right. I
me.
can send you this link after the class via email or yeah, via email. So you can see that this is let me move this. Well, I can't. Sorry, I have to move it around to find the bar here. The bar, it's already at the top. And then I can show you, there's the picture. So it's multi-well. You can use the lid as a palette, but in my opinion, you might need more space. So having an additional palette is good. This is theoretically supposed to keep the paint wet. It's supposed to be leak proof and waterproof, like airproof, so to speak, to keep it wet. And so therefore, you don't have the issue of the paint drying on your palette the way I've been dealing with it for so long, where I re-wet the paint. So I haven't tried it yet, but I thought it was worth 14 bucks to try. So you squeeze your tube paints into here, into the wells, and they stay wet. And then I would just take paint out of this onto my palette. And then at the end of my painting session, I can use a palette knife and return the unused paint back to these wells as long as it's not been tainted, right, with other paint. So this is just, a new material. I'm going to play around with this because I'm tired of putting water on my paint on my palette and having my paints be already diluted and then having to work with that. And so just letting you know about this. So I'll send you the link to this after um, after class, and you can. But this isn't a requirement. I'm just letting you know of a handy new nifty thing. Okay, stop the share. All right, so now I have a couple things I wanted to talk about. Let me move. Come on. Let me get rid of that. Let's see. Got too many windows open. Um, I sent you a color wheel. That's not the right thing. Sorry, you guys. Casting about on my too many windows open on my desktop. Here we go. Okay. This is open. Okay, good. All right. Let me go back here to share screen. There we go. So I sent you this palette. There. Can you see my palette here? It's a round thing with a bunch of colors.
I am apparently not.
You're not getting the screen shares? Did you get the one with the Amazon? I can try this again.
No, I think it might just be my.
I see it.
Yeah, see, I think it's Mimi. I think it's just.
Are you on your phone again? Are you having to be on your phone? Or are you?
Now I'm
Okay.
wondering if I should be.
Yeah. Technology. Technology.
Let me see if I can.
Okay.
But you can. I mean, you can.
Okay. So this color wheel, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. I poached this out of a book by this guy's name is Stephen Quiller. So here's the book. Here's the book. All right. A plug for this guy. Okay. This is called Painter's Guide to Color by Stephen Quiller. And you can see that this is called, he calls it the Quiller Wheel. Bless his heart. Branding, branding. So I picked this book up at an art supply store used, but you can pick it up on Amazon if you want. He works in watercolor and he works in acrylic. And he's very nerdy about color.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I just? It says on my phone. It says that it's asking you to let me join.
Oh, I thought you're joined. Oh, okay.
From my phone. Sorry.
Oh no, that's perfectly fine. I'm sorry, I didn't see it because it was in all the stuff going on my laptop here. No,
Okay.
absolutely interrupt me for that.
I can see now. Okay, I'm gonna leave here.
Might have to zoom in.
Okay.
All right. It's going to be pretty small for you.
Yeah.
But anyway, but you do have, I sent you the files via email in two halves because this was, a double page spread. But I had my husband put this together into one file for me to share. But you can print yours out in two halves, which is why I sent it to you that way. So he created this wheel. And the nice thing about this is just really about the idea. Let me move my water so I don't spill it here. All right, so I'm going to zoom in here. Because the type is small. All right, so you can see the small type, it's going to be more readable if you print out the files that I sent you via email. But a lot of times when we're talking about color and we talk about the color wheel, students go, oh, yeah, I understand that. I understand that there's three primaries. I understand that there's secondaries. I understand that there's tertiaries. I understand that the complements, that you mix across, the opposite across to mix the complement. But then when we get to painting and we have colors in tubes and the tubes have these weird names and the tubes don't really correspond directly to the color wheel. They go, well, okay, I understood the color wheel, but this blue doesn't look like that blue. And what do I do with the brown? And how do I mix that color? Because I don't understand how these tube colors correspond to the color wheel. And so this wheel helps with that idea because he has taken the tube colors and placed them in their likely positions on the color wheel, corresponding to, like you can see here, and he's named them. So, and he works in watercolor and acrylic, and then he also labeled them with oil too. So if you look at the names of the colors, it'll say WOAL. or it'll say just WO, like on Mars Violet. So Mars Violet isn't available in acrylic, but it's available in watercolor and oil, probably in some paint lines. Sepia is available in watercolor and oil, right? But neutral tint is available in watercolor, oil, and acrylic. They don't talk about gouache, but that's actually not really the point to this, is the idea that the tube colors can exist on the color wheel, but they're not necessarily located in the primary and, the pure primary and the pure secondary position. For here they've got burnt sienna located, and he's placed it, near the red, between red and orange, and toward the complement, right? So it's basically a neutralized orange. And so when you see these dots, they are tube colors that he's placed in his approximation of where they exist on the color wheel in terms of whether they are a mixture of two primaries or a mixture of a primary and a secondary, and whether they are neutralized to some extent by their complement or even by, a combination. And so it's really about the idea that the tube colors fall somewhere on the color wheel, but they're not necessarily a representation of the pure spectrum colors. And the reason is that the way color works with light, so we see color because when the light falls on an object outside or indoors and it's white light has all the colors of the spectrum in it. Well, as you know, we know this because of prisms, right? Because we see, and because of rainbows, we see the white light broken up into the colors of the spectrum. So we know that where light is concerned, white light contains all the colors of the spectrum. But when it hits an object, then the object absorbs all the colors of the spectrum except, for instance, on a red apple, the red apple doesn't absorb the red rays, but it absorbs everything else. And then that is converted into heat. So the red apple reflects the red rays, and we see that. That's how we see color. So when you're out in the world and you're looking at the world, what you're seeing is the reflection is the green trees, the leaves are reflecting that color, and they're not absorbing it, but they're absorbing everything else. And so where light is concerned, when an object is white, it's reflecting all the colors back to us, because white light is a mixture of all the colors of the spectrum. That's not how paint works, but that's how light works. So where we're talking about black, that object that's black is absorbing all the colors of the spectrum, because black is an absence of light where light is concerned. So a black object is absorbing all the colors of the spectrum, and we don't get any reflection back. So we see it as black. A white shirt is reflecting all the colors back. It's not absorbing anything, and we see it as white. That's why a white shirt stays cooler than a black shirt that we're wearing, right? Because a black shirt absorbs all the colors of the spectrum, all the light rays, and converts it to heat, right? So then it's hot, like a black roof. But a white shirt reflects all of that and stays cooler. So that's how light works. And in the spectrum, when we see the prism breaking apart the white light, those colors are pure. So the red, the green, the blue mix, like the blue and the red and the yellow are primaries, and they mix equally. So the blue mixes equally with red to make a beautiful violet, and then it also mixes equally with yellow to make a beautiful green, and that's just how light works. But when we're talking about paint, when back in the ancient times when they created paint, they started with substances that created the colors that they were able to make, like browns, like, the cave paintings in browns and in black. They used charcoal for the black. They used clay for the browns or the reddish browns. So that's where it all started. And then as time went on, people discovered, for instance, lapis lazuli. They ground it up to make ultramarine blue. That's why it was so expensive back in the Renaissance and the Middle Ages, because it was actually ground lapis lazuli. And that made the blue because it was already a blue rock. So then they discovered more ways to make more colors, but the colors are from substances that occur in the natural environment. And then later, they're from substances that are made in the lab. And they're also from, heavy metals like cadmium and cobalt. They're from, zinc and lead, make white. So they're from substances in the lab that, they basically enhance them, work with them to make cobalt blue, cobalt violet, cobalt turquoise, different colors they can make from cobalt, cadmium red, yellow, orange, and green. So cadmium makes all those colors because of the different ways that they treat it. But it's still not pure like light. So it has other stuff in it. And that means that it doesn't mix. It's not exactly the color on the color wheel that we need that would make it, it's not the red that we can mix equally with blue to make a beautiful violet, or mix equally with yellow to make a beautiful orange. And so we have to make accommodations. That's why we have these two colors. And they're made of substances, and the substances cause them to have certain characteristics. For instance, earth colors. They're ground dirt, yellow ochre, burnt umber, raw umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna. They're ground clay, and so they're grainy, and they're opaque, and they dry sort of, heavy. They're sort of heavy. Cadmium has that characteristic. It tends to be opaque. It tends to be sort of heavy. It's strong in mixtures, right? It has a nice orange, a nice tomatoey red. It has these certain characteristics. Alizarin crimson used to be, I think it was originally made from a ground root, but now it's made in a lab and it's more permanent, and it's not exactly like the original version. It has different characteristics, but it makes a better purple. It's a cooler red. It doesn't make as good of, it mixes a certain way. It's more of a dye. It's more transparent. So that's why the two colors have certain characteristics based on what they're made of, and they don't necessarily correspond perfectly to the color wheel. And so we have to make accommodations. And over time, as you paint, and maybe you've already been painting long enough, you become familiar with the characteristics of burnt umber, the characteristics of ultramarine blue, the characteristics of phthalo blue versus viridian. Viridian is not as intense as phthalo blue. It's a similar color, but it's less intense. It's more of an organic pigment. It doesn't tint as strongly. It doesn't make as strong of a dark. So you get acquainted with the different tube colors that you're using, and then after a while, you can start to add tube colors and go, oh, how does this behave? What does it do? How can I use it in mixtures? I recommend to my students to start with like a core palette that they get acquainted with, and then start to explore other tube colors, and buy one when you order art supplies, or if you inherit some, you start to go, oh, well, this is interesting. How does this behave? That's pretty dark. Can I make a good dark with it? What can I mix with it? That's a good way to start to get acquainted with tube colors. And people think that they have to own the entire selection of tube colors, from a manufacturer or from multiple manufacturers, but that's not the case. It's expensive, and you don't always need all the colors on your palette. You really just need enough to mix what you want to mix. So you can play around with this palette. You have the power to print it out because I sent you the files. And I just wanted to give you, a reason why the tube colors don't correspond exactly to the color wheel, and how they actually can fall on the color wheel here, like this one. They fall on the color wheel, but it's just not exactly in the primaries and secondary position. And so they mix certain ways, and they don't mix exactly the same as each other because they're made of different stuff. So getting to know them sort of as personalities that have certain characteristics is helpful.
Does I can't see, but does it explain, like, is that like reddish maroonish color you're pointing to, is that on that line because it's like slightly mixed with a little of the like violet or blue?
Yeah, so this is red ochre.
Uh-huh.
He also includes some other two colors in here. He says light red, he says English red, right? And what they're available in watercolor and oil, but not in acrylic. So this is sort of an earthy color. An ochre is usually an earth color.
So, but
And
is the line there,
this line,
is it because it's coming a little tiny bit towards those bluer,
yes,
like the blues?
that's
Okay.
right. So this color
Cool.
is neutral because it's toward the center. It's heading, it's a little bit mixed with the complement over here. And it might be mixed a little bit with blue too. So it might be mixed with
Cool.
this, right? So that's the idea. You got the idea exactly. You know, we've got burnt umber here, and this is his interpretation. So he created this, but the idea is a good idea. Whether you agree with it or not, and how it's mixed doesn't, whether I agree with it, that's not actually, it's not the point. So burnt umber is here, it's reddish, right? And it's further toward the center because it's more neutralized than red ochre, right? So it's being mixed more with these other neutralizing colors to bring it more toward the center. And so as things get toward the center, they're more neutral. You've got Mars violet. Neutral tint is obviously neutral, right? Payne's gray is a gray. Davies gray looks like a greenish gray, and that's why it's on this side toward the greens. And then he's got neutral, then he mixed a neutral in the center as representative of whatever, a neutral. And then things start to go on the other side and they're bluer. So Payne's gray is bluer, indigo, okay. Prussian blue is here, and then Prussian green is there towards the greens. So you've got exactly the right idea. All right, so you can take a look at it. I send it to you so you can take a look at it, see what is. If you use watercolor or oil or acrylic, then this should be helpful. He doesn't include gouache. That's okay because it's really just about the idea. And a lot of these colors are available in gouache, right? Depending upon the line, the manufacturer. And some gouache has its own weird obscure colors like the perling colors. They might also be available in acrylic through Winsor Newton. So he doesn't have everything here, but he just basically has the heavy hitters. So anyway, just wanted to, because that's a question I get a lot. I get people really confused about how the two colors relate to the color wheel. All right, let me open another file because I wanted to quickly, see now I don't have my phone, so I have to keep track of time another way here with my tablet. Yay, so good thing I have more than one device. I wanted to open some images so that we can look at gouache paintings by other people. Let me look at here we go. I was on Etsy, getting into trouble on Etsy, and I came across this guy's work that I thought was interesting. He has a lot of prints on Etsy, but he has a few originals, and he does landscapes. And I thought they were pretty cool. So I basically screenshotted his page and then I cropped out his work. Here we go, open both of these here. Whoops. So I'm going to screen share these so we can look at them because the way he's working is interesting. And it's different from how I work, but I'm always interested to see how different people work. So his name is Charles Thomas, and he has this painting for sale, and it's small. This is, what was it? 5 by 8, 5 inches by 8 inches. So this is a small piece. Is it done on site? I don't know. Is it done from a photo? Maybe, right? Or maybe it's done on site. I don't really know. It looks like he's done it. Let me see if I can enlarge this. Oh, well, I can enlarge it within the frame. Let me see here. Can I enlarge that? Okay, kind of. I can kind of enlarge it. He's working on a textured paper, I think a linen type of texture. So he has this linen texture. You know, he's not saying what he uses. So maybe it's oil painting paper because it has a linen texture, or maybe it's a drawing paper that has, I don't know, whatever. Oil painting paper has a ground on it. So it has it like a gesso. And if he's working on that, then it won't be soaking, the paint, the gouache paint won't soak in to the paper because it has a gesso ground on it. If he's working on a watercolor or a drawing paper, I don't know whether watercolor paper even comes in this linen look, so I have no idea. But if he's working on a drawing paper, then it might soak in. But you can see how he's using it. He's painting in a really impressionist style, which I like. He's got a flat brush. You can see the stroke here, right? He's got this flat brush, right, with the blunt end, right? And his flat brush isn't worn down like mine, so it still has a chiseled look on these strokes. There's another stroke. He's using the side of it here to make these narrow strokes here. So he's using the side of that brush to make a narrower stroke. But you can see his different chisely brush strokes here. And he's mostly using thick paint, and he sometimes lets the paper show through, and also uses sort of a dry brush across the texture of the paper, which I think is pretty cool. So that's why I'm wanting to point this out. I'm going to scroll around here. You can see again his brush stroke where he's layering over other paint. He's doing a dry brush stroke across here using the texture to make sort of a halftone. So instead of mixing this color right here, he's got this warm color underneath, and then he comes over it with a green mixture like that. His brush is drier, so it's not full of paint, and it's making a dry brush kind of a halftone with the background showing through. Let's see if I can move this over. So you can see how he's, got dark against light here, but otherwise in this piece, it's very impressionistic. I liked it, so I thought, well, that'll be interesting to show you how he's working. And we can play around with this technique too. I have certain thing I'm going to show you today, but this is very loose. I was showing you a more tight control technique on the tulips and also on the video that I sent you on YouTube. That I showed you a little bit more of that technique. Today I'm going to show you how to paint the background a bit. But initially when we painted the tulips in, or when I painted them in anyway, I kept things pretty loose, and I used some of these techniques that he's using where I use this dry brush across the white background to make kind of a halftone. All right, and he's got one more piece here that I'm going to share. Here. And this is also really small. This is about, 4 by 5 or 4 or something like that. So this is little, and it may be from a photo. He's working on the same, looks like he's also working on this linen texture paper, but you can see how he's come forward with a smaller brush to make it look like more grass texture here. And then back here, he's got it flatter because it's further in the distance and doesn't have as much texture. So this is this is painterly, but it's not quite as painterly as the other one. Smaller, a little, it's not as long of a painting because it's more like 5 by 6 rather than 5 by 8. So, softening edges here, a mixture of soft and hard edges. So there we go. Okay. Any questions from you guys? Is that at all inspiring for you?
Do you ever do plein air gouache painting?
You know, I haven't, and I've wanted to, but I haven't. And I know that Mike Hernandez, I have an article by him that I'm going to send you, whether you've seen it or not. You know, if you haven't seen it, then that'll be nice. And we can look at that on screen share. That has a few of his pieces. And that's an article, God, it came out, you know, 8 years ago or something like that, 8 or 10 years ago. And I clipped it, you know, I think it might have been in Plein Air magazine, and I don't subscribe to that, but I happen to have one. I don't know. And I went, oh, look at this, because he's really was a big driver of the new interest in gouache, because he did paint with it. He'd been painting with it at his job, which was what? Was he with Disney, or he was with some big company, right, doing animation backgrounds and, you know, working with gouache in that capacity. And then when he went out to paint on site, he just painted in gouache. And I think that that aroused a lot of interest in gouache that really wasn't there. There wasn't, there weren't people painting in gouache very much. Because I know, because, you know, I have been painting in gouache, and people didn't really know what it was. So I really credit him with the new resurging interest, and he does a lot of plein air, and he teaches workshops. So we will look at that, but I haven't actually had the opportunity to take it and play with it on site. So I can't really advise you on that. But I think that a lot of the techniques I'm showing you are going to be useful, and even that palette that I will send you the link for, that would be useful plein air, because
Yeah, thinking that.
yeah, because you won't have your paints drying out as much. There's one thing that I can tell you that happens when it's hot, or if you're in the sun, which, you know, in plein air, usually you're seeking shade, or, you know, you're trying to control how much heat stroke you get, you know, and maybe you're under an umbrella, but in the heat, gouache will dry on your palette really quickly, and you will find, even in summer weather, like, so, you know, ambient, you're in your house and it's hot, right? The gouache will dry on your palette. What you're mixing will dry. You'll find that you have to add more water and add it more often to control that drying, that rate of drying. So, so that's what I have to say about that. You know, I'm definitely interested in I just haven't had time to do it.
Yeah, cool.
All right, so I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my other camera here. There we are. Hello. All right. So you have my palette here, and you also have it on this iPhone. And I'm trying to think, you know, so as long as I'm zoomed out, you can see this palette, which is better light than this palette, than the iPhone camera. Sorry about that. But I'm finding that zooming in helps you see the detail more. It helps you see what I'm actually doing more, than me painting from this view, which is further out, where you can see my palette. So I'm going to zoom in on this and show you what I was doing on, and then I have to shift so that I'm in the window here. So I'm going to move stuff over and then adjust my phone. Let's see, there we go. All right. Shove my painting underneath my palette. There we go. And then I can I'm just going to tilt this view here so that you can see the palette. And then I generally have to turn on another light. So, there. So that might help a little bit more with this view on my iPhone. And now I'm knocking all kinds of stuff down underneath my table. There we go. Okay. So a couple days ago, when I did that video on Wednesday, probably, I went ahead and did some work on, let's see, you can get, closer in so that you can see what I'm doing. Yeah. And let me make sure that I'm focused. Yeah, okay. More light. So I went and I played around with this petal here, and I worked on this blossom, and I worked a little bit in here. You know, I didn't work on this leaf very much, but I just went in here and put the dark in so that I wouldn't have to think about it so much today. Because what I wanted to do today is work on this yellow tulip and work on the background. And I felt like, you know, you guys could use a little bit more information about what, is that as far as I can go? Yeah, okay, so that's the maximum of my zoom on this camera. So when I laid this in, as you recall, you can see how loose it is here. And I kept this really loose. And part of the reason I did that is because I was using the white of the paper to create some of these lights, and it causes me to not have to mix as much paint. So that's one thing. So it's a bit of a time saver to work loosely and also transparently at the beginning. But then also I wanted to get some painterly texture in here on this tulip. So having the painterly texture can do a lot of work for you if you don't want to do as much of this noodling here, right? To create the nuances that you see in your photo. So when I look at my photo, this tulip is, you know, quite light. And I decided that I like it better when it's more intensely colored. And I also decided when the other nice thing about doing work that is loose is that you get happy accidents and you can make decisions about those happy accidents. And so you can say, well, I like this, which is what I'm saying. I like this in here, which is where the brush strokes are implying the texture of the tulip and the form of the tulip instead of doing little tiny brush strokes like this. So my intention here is to finesse this edge around here, finesse this edge, and probably finesse this here. This is a deeper yellow on the photo, and, you know, basically pick out the edge of this petal here. So finessing the details is what I'd like to do while leaving these more gestural strokes, just because I like them and I like how they look. So I'm taking parts of the photo information here. I'm going to take this line, you know, I'm going to take this line. I'm going to have it leave it darker and not take white and go in here and make it super light. And I also have a stronger edge in here, and I'm going to leave that too because I like it. So taking what I like from the photo and then taking what I like from my painting and merging them to some extent. So let's see, I'm just kind of getting used to this view here. I have to move my water. You're not going to be able to see my water bucket, but I'll just have to tell you, you know, the nice thing about you seeing the water bucket and the paper towel is that you get an idea of how often I'm rinsing my brush without me just saying it. you know, without me having to narrate it. How often I'm rinsing my brush, how often I'm wiping it off, you know, I'm getting the water off of it. Things like that I feel are important because we talked about, you know, I mentioned controlling how much water is on your brush. So I'm going to start working on this tulip, and then I'm going to work on the background some and probably wreck the background really good. And I'll talk about that. You know, the thing about the background is that you can reactivate the paint over and over, but you do have to let it dry in between your actions. So I'm going to see how that works today. You know, while I'm waiting for the background to dry, I can come over and work more on areas of this painting. And that's what I would be doing normally. I would be waiting for the background to dry. You know, I get in there, make a big change. I have to let it dry before I can see whether I like it, see what I like, what I don't like, because it's going to dry darker or lighter, depending. And then I have to decide what my next course of action is going to be. And I want it to be dry so that I can work over it if needed. But mostly it's so that I can make a judgment on whether I like it or not and what I'm going to do then. So it helps if you're working elsewhere on the painting so that you can let the background dry. Let it take, because after a while you're bored and your paint is going to get really wet and then it just needs to dry, and it takes a little while at that point. Okay, so working on this. I've got a dark edge here up against the tulip, and then this dark comes up against here. So, I want to smooth this out so it's more elegant on this shape, and darken this here so that it's up against the edge of the tulip. So I'm going to be manipulating in here. But I really want to leave this brush strokiness for the most part. And I don't want to make, I don't want to use too much white in too many places so that I make it look chalky. All right, so I'm going to take my dark because I still have my puddles, right? I put some water on these piles of paint and actually could stand to maybe add a little bit more water in places. Like here, this ultramarine blue is looking pretty dry still. Some tube paints, because of what they're made of, they take more water than other tube paints. So you'll find that they vary in how much water they need to soak up. White definitely takes a while to get softened up. And once again, I might have to lay out some white because it gets so frustrating to try to get enough pigment off of a dried pile. All right, so I'm going to mix a little bit lighter yellow here. And I'm going to work this white a little bit, these piles, to try to get some of the pigment. And I've got a lot of water going on, so, and that's just basically the downside to what I've been doing for 40 years, which is why I really like the idea of that palette with the compartments. All right, I need some yellow. And I'm looking here, and I'm probably going to make sort of an orange. So I still have this sort of yellow orange here that's from what we did before. Now, one thing that you want to be aware of when you're using a little teeny brush is that if you have, I can't really show you, I don't think you can see, but I dip it in the water and it'll get droplets on the ferrule, this metal part here. And I've learned over the years to be vigilant about if I get water droplet on the ferrule, because it'll sit up here and I'll be mixing away and I'll be going about my business. And then it will roll down the ferrule right when I've got it on my painting. And it will suddenly blurp down the bristles onto my painting and create a puddle. So I have a sixth sense now after years of this, where I'm aware of whether I've got a bunch of water on my burial. It's the biggest issue on a tiny brush, the bigger issue on a tiny brush than it is on a bigger brush. But it's one reason why I wipe my brush a lot, and sometimes I will lay the whole brush down on my, let me show you here. I have my paper towel and I'll just lay the whole brush down and rotate it to get that water off. So you'll become aware. It's certain to happen to you where you get water up there and it runs down your brush. And then you'll go, crap, now I know what you was talking about. There we go. So I made it a little bit lighter. I'm looking at the camera view here. Maybe it's a little lighter than I want it to be because I don't want it to be sticking out looking bright. But I'm going to wait for it to dry here for a second before I make a decision on whether to darken it. So I'm picking up some more of this and coming down here to create a better line here. So this is sort of a picky way of working. It's not the same way as, what's his name? I'm trying to remember his name now. Charles, was it Charles? Charles Thomas. Not the same way of working as Charles Thomas was working, but it's also a different situation. So if you learn how to use brushstroke and how to tie details together and become aware of hard edges versus soft edges and how to manipulate, then that's a good skill to have. And this is just one way of working with gouache. That's why I'm eager to move on to a different painting. So that's why I accelerated things a little bit more. So I like this line to be a little bit more graceful. But this is all the stuff that I can fix, so I don't have to worry about it if I get a little sloppy in my initial lay-in. I can keep the gestural stuff and fix the things that go astray while keeping the more gestural loose quality that I want. So I can see a little bit of my pencil coming through, so I'm going to cover that up. Although it's not the end of the world if you have a little bit of pencil coming through, depending on the painting. Let's see. You know that saying, it's like watching paint dry. I think sometimes watching painting videos, people who want to watch me paint, I go, really, it's just really not going to be, it's not going to be a thrill a minute, you know, it's just not that exciting for somebody who's not really interested in seeing the process. They have some idea that it's going to be super exciting. And I go, yeah, this is really, you know, definitely picky and tedious in some ways. So I picked up some dark because I'm going to adjust this petal here, and I'm using the dark background to do it. So it really does help for you to have that iPhone view of my palette. see. So I'm using a little bit of his technique. I don't have a board with as much texture as he had with his linen texture, but there's a little bit of texture to this board. And if I use less paint, a less watery paint mixture, then if I've got a slightly dry brush, then I will get a little bit of this slight dry brush look to my work, and I can use that to my advantage because it basically creates a halftone. And sometimes, where I want it. So there's several different ways to make a tint or a halftone. You can you can mix the color. You can let the white of the paper show through and make it transparent and with the white of the paper showing through, or you can use a dry brush technique. And you can either dry brush over the white of the paper, but then you can also dry brush over other colors. And there's a word for that. It's called scumbling. When you dry brush in oil or almost any medium over other colors, it's called scumbling. So now you know what that means if you encounter that term. So I'm just going to warm this up. It feels too cool. So I've taken a little bit of orange here and I'm just warming it up. And I'm using a little bit of dry brush to warm it up so that I don't reactivate the paint. All right, so I just want to come in here and make it darker right in here so that there's more dimension to this. So I'm picking up some orange, kind of looking. And I'm picking up some little bit of red from my cadmium. And going to see if it's too red. Might be hard to say. Making sort of a middle mixture. And this is transparent. I'm using this transparently to come in here. And adding some more water to it because it's maybe a little too intense and pulling it. Woo! So I used my finger to pick up some of the extra pigment because I didn't want it to be as dark and intense as that, as it looked like it was going to be if I just let it dry. I can kind of dab. And now I want to see this be lighter, this edge here. So, you go back and forth and you go, oh, okay, I need to make that lighter. I need to make this adjustment. And I did, I'm using this tiny brush and I keep wiping off the ferrule on my paper towel. Make sure that I want the water to be where I want it. I want it to be on the bristles and towards the end of the bristles and not up on my ferrule where it's going to make a blob. Sometimes I have to play around to get the right value just because of gouache's weird nature of drying lighter or darker, and sometimes it can be difficult to see whether I've got the right color mixture. So I'm going to take my nubby brush. Well, actually, I have a few different brushes here. I have a smaller flat brush. This is let me see if I can show you. There we go. Kind of blurry, smaller flat, okay, compared to my little brush, compared to my nubby brush, okay. This is a, what is it? It's a number 6, but you know that doesn't mean anything, right? So it's got a little bit of wear on the corners of the brush, so it's not so squared off. And I'm going to use this to sort of soften here, move this down. I feel like this is too stark. And then in my picture, there's a blurry petal back here. And so I want to do something right here because it's drawing my eye. So I'm picking up some red, orange. So this brush is it's what's called a bright. I talked about the names of brushes. There's a flat and there's a bright. A bright has a shorter, it's squared off at the tip, but it has the shorter bristles. So it doesn't carry as much paint or water. It carries less than a flat. But it also means that because it has shorter bristles, you have a little bit more control over, so it doesn't carry as much paint, but you have more control over your brush stroke. I'm going to soften this edge of the leaf here. Yeah. And you can also make short choppy strokes with it, and so you have a little bit more control over the edge of it if you want to make an edge stroke, and you have more control over these short choppy strokes, whereas a flat, which is more like this brush, so this is longer than it is wide, and this is closer to being, you know, about as long as it is wide. And flat brushes can even be, like that's a flat. So this brush, this flat, this is a, you know, a synthetic mongoose brush. Because of the length of the bristles, if I fill this with paint, it holds more paint. But because of the length of the bristles, it's a little bit floppy. Can you see? It's kind of floppy. But it holds more paint, but it's floppier. And so the bristles spread out. You can see that they spread. So it's not as accurate, right? If I want to make shorter, choppier strokes. So, but it holds more paint, right? So this is the trade-off. This one holds more paint, of course, than this. But these shorter brushes, you can control them better because the bristles are shorter. So that's something for you guys to check out when you, in your free time on your own, you play around with how brushes behave and what you can do with them. I'm mixing a little bit more dark green because I've got maybe a little too much. Oh, actually, what I want is maybe some yellow too. Let's see, what do I want? Greenish yellow. There we go, yellowish green to make this. And I don't mind having the texture. I've sort of left the brush texture here because I liked it from my loose lay-in. I liked it. So, and again, I'm rinse out my brush. It's usually when you rinse your brush out and you dip it in the water and you got it all the way in there over your ferrule, and then I bring it out onto my towel and I wipe it off, you know, all the way. I put it flat on the towel and wipe off that ferrule. So I can come in here, I kind of muff this edge, and I can smooth out the edge using some water, just using my wet brush. Don't know quite how I feel about this edge, but I'm just going to leave it for now. And here where I muffed it a bit, I can reactivate the paint and fix that. There we go. And I kind of want to, I really want to soften this edge a little bit more. So I'm picking up, I have some green that's got some white in it here on my palette. I could also just use some yellow. And I have too much of a line here, so I'm going to just soften it. Here we go. Soften this. There. So I reduced the value contrast in here because it was too distracting for me. Here. So I'm going to zoom out so you can see maybe the whole piece a little bit better. I haven't worked on this leaf that much, but I'm inclined to move on at the moment and come over here and play around with this background because of the drying time. So, depending upon what I want to do with the background, and I definitely would start to play around with the background if I have ideas about it. Now, I actually like this background, but I'm going to mess it up, right? Because I want to show you some different things that you can do and how the paint behaves. I don't really have a super clear plan and I haven't rehearsed this, so it may wind up to be a mess, but the beauty is that you can reactivate the paint. And even when something is a mess, you go, oh, okay, that's a mess. I'm going to rearrange the paint and add this. I'm going to add more white, or I'm going to add, more red, or whatever it is you want to add, and rearrange the paint again and see how that looks, right? So you can't as easily paint over as you can in acrylic, but you can continue to reactivate the paint and re-wet it. But I'm also not going to worry about finishing these edges, and I probably will muff this edge a bit, and I didn't finish this edge, and I might muff this edge a bit, right? So I'm not going to go and finish all of this before I deal with the background. So usually the background takes a big brush. So I've got my big brush here. Now, if I wanted to take this pale blue violet, and if I said, I really think this would be better if it had a dark background. I really want to make this background, blackish like this and have the tulips coming out of the dark background. And then I might not see these petals as much. These wouldn't be as prominent. So if I wanted to do that, then I would need to do something called soaking up. I would need to soak up this white paint because if I paint this with a dark, it's going to continue to reactivate what's underneath, and that will come up through the paint. And it just depends on how. Let me do it. I'm just going to do this, okay? It's going to be a mess. All right, so I'm going to mix a dark. This is burnt umber. I've had it sitting here, soaking in some water. And I don't know, and I'll come over here and I'll paint on the edge and go, do I like that? I'll make marks on the edge because the edge is probably going to be covered. If this thing gets framed or sold or anything, it's going to be covered by a frame. I'm adding some green to it. This is Windsor green and burnt umber, so it's making it not as reddish. So it's really a green that's similar to these darks. And I need it to be, first of all, I need more paint. That's thing A. I need a bigger puddle. Secondly, I need it to be not too transparent. I'd like it to be as opaque as I can get it. And I'm going to add this purple in. This is Windsor purple, which is dioxazine. It's a really dark. But usually what I would do is I would soak this up. But I'm going to show you what happens if I don't. All right, so I've got this mixture. This might not be enough to cover everything. And then if it's not enough to cover, then I have to stop and add more and mix more paint. But because I need something that's not too wet, so this is wet enough, but it's not sloppy and transparent. I don't have a ton of water here. And then I can come in and go. So what I'd like to do is not overbrush it. But you can see that it's a little bit transparent against the white painted background. Because if I overbrush it, I'm going to pick up what's underneath. So my desire is to cover what's underneath and not pick it up at this moment. Okay, that's my current desire. So I'm not adding a lot of water to this. I'm not reaching into my bucket. I might have to mix more paint. But I know that if I get it too wet, I'm not using the idea of a wash. If I get it too wet, then it's going to reactivate what's underneath. Taking a little bit more care with these more finished flowers because I'll have to come in and paint that with a smaller brush. Let me see, I'm probably gonna have to mix more paint here, but. So now you start to see how dry my brush is, okay? So I've got this dry brush edge. I'm gonna pick up a little bit of water to help my paint flow a little bit more. But I just took a corner of my brush and stuck it in the water. I didn't use a lot. So there I started to brush it, got a little glare, and it started to activate the paint underneath. But there's no reason to panic. I'm just going to make a little bit more paint over here from these puddles. And I'm just letting that dry. So that's transparent. So this has got transparent because I don't have quite enough paint. I would like it to be there, cover a little bit better. So this is my initial attempt to change the background to dark. Mixing some more paint up from my piles, getting more pigment in here. There we go. And I'm just going to bring it over to, I'm not going to belabor this too much over here. But a big brush is essential so that you disturb the paint layer underneath as little as possible. And you cover more ground or else it's going to take you forever. All right, so now that I'm here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit for you. So you can see about, how it looks. What's that? So this is where I activated the underlayer. You can see that we can see brush strokes, right? It's not really dense. So a lot of times when I do this kind of thing, if I did this and then I start to make decisions, I go, okay, how do I like that? I kind of knew I wasn't going to like it that much, but so this, I can actually feel if I put my hand on here and it feels cool, too cool. There's a temperature difference between the dry gouache and the gouache that's still drying. So I can kind of feel it because if it's cooler up here because I did that more recently. So I can decide if I want to give it more time, but I can rub it. You can see that I can rub it, and it's dry here. It's not really dry up here yet. So I'm going to put another coat on here using the same, I'm going to say technique, okay? I'm mixing up some more of this color, my burnt umber combined with Windsor green, which is basically phthalo, and combined with Windsor violet, which is basically dioxazine. Okay. Getting it, because I'm using dried paint. What was dried paint? I'm getting it, you know, trying to work through any chunky granules that are gotten into the mix here. Okay. It's not too wet. All right, so I'm starting to get a little bit more density here. And again, I'm not over brushing. Going over the spot where I reactivated the paint underneath. Worked okay. All right, not worrying about that right now. So letting this dry now so I can see, you can kind of see where it's wet as I move it. You can see these wet bits in here. So that needs to dry. So I have to go off and do something else. So I can work on this leaf and some of this stuff in here. I like some aspects to this. What I like is again, I like the loose quality in here. And now that I'm looking at this, I see that even though the photo, so the photo, of course, has a whitish background. So these darks in here are nice. But now that I've changed my background, this dark is kind of competing with that. So I'm going to cool that off and make it a little less dark. That way, this will all read as a unit. That's already drying. So I'm going to lighten this in here because it just feels too dense and dark. I like this. So when I make a change like that, a sweeping change, it'll change my perception of everything else. Notice how this all looks much brighter and it pops a lot more. And these darks don't look very intense, right? Because we're comparing them to all this dark background here. So that's why when you lay a painting in, if you can, you get all your paint colors in so that you can make decisions based on what's there instead of, sorry, I'm pulling this thing back down. I keep pushing it up. Instead of working from one corner to the other, and then you don't have everything covered with paint, so you can't make decisions very well. So when I make this kind of sweeping change, it changes my perception of what's going on here. All right, so this is almost dry. So that's how quickly. So now what I'm going to do is this. I'm taking my brush, my flat big brush, and it's wet. And I'm actually taking a little bit more water. I basically scraped it off on the edge of the bucket, and then I went back and I got more water into it. So I'm going to reactivate this. And what I can do is, I mean, I could leave this and I could put another coat on it and have it be this intense black. But what I want to do instead, because I'm showing you, is I'm going to reactivate what's underneath. And what will happen is this will become gray, but I'm going to leave the dark edge up against the leaves and up against the flowers. And that's going to be easy to do. So this is just going to happen all naturally. So here I am with my big brush and I go, all right. So you can even see how much water is on there. See how it's puddling up here? I don't necessarily want that. But see how I'm already starting to reactivate. And I'm just going to go, okay. And I'm brushing with a certain amount of oomph, putting some pressure on. So you see how I'm pulling that up? And I do this a lot with my backgrounds because gouache's, I don't feel that gouache's best feature is to be flat and dark and to not have brush stroke and verve, basically. So I can do this and reactivate this whole thing and pull that up and mix it in. So if I want to smooth it out, I can use my brush to sort of work this to smooth it out. But a lot of times what I do is I leave some brush stroke back here. There we go. So there, I reactivated it. Can bring it over here, need a little bit more water. Reactivated the layer that's underneath. Left a darker edge around the tulips. And I can exploit this darker edge, and I can even come in and in areas where I go, oh, I like this much darker edge, this heavier, darker edge, and maybe I'll go ahead and put that back in, and I can manipulate it however I want. But now I have to let it dry again because I can't really do, unless I want to, I'm going to pull this up a little bit more. There we go, getting some of that white color coming up. There. So that's reactivating. And then once it dries, I can say to myself, huh, okay, how do I like that? And maybe I want to add something else to it and reactivate it again and rearrange it again. So, but it does need to dry before I can make a judgment. So I told you I was going to mess up this painting, right? And now, you know, when I look at the rest of this, I feel as though the darks up here aren't punchy enough because they can't compete with this here. So any questions about what I'm doing?
My
So,
cat
but
is meowing.
Your cat? Okay, I can live with that. So what have you guys tried? You guys don't have your paints, you're not working, you're watching.
I didn't do that part. I've been
Okay.
following
You're
you.
like, oh God, I'm gonna blow this painting up.
so by kind of putting the dark wash on and then reactivate, you're essentially kind of mixing the two colors.
Yes, I am. I am mixing the two colors now. White, because there was a lot of white in this color, right? The way it was in that pale violet. It will cool down. It will cool a color that you mix it with. It's just, that's an overarching fact, you know, that's the case in acrylic, in oil, and in gouache. If you add white to a color, and watercolor, if you're doing transparent watercolor and you're layering it over white paper, it's not the same if you're not adding white paint to it. But with oil, with acrylic, and with gouache, if you add white to a color, it makes it cooler. And then you have to, if you want to keep it warm, then you have to compensate. But yes, I basically mixed this dark. You know, I laid that over. I could have left it dark, but I decided that I wanted to change it and mix the two, right? And reactivate this out here. Now, this is getting dry. Again, I can kind of feel it because it's not sloppy wet now, but I can feel it and I can see that it's not quite dry. There's a little sheen. And I could go back in and work it again if I know that I'm not happy. So if I go, you know, I'm really not happy with it, I'm going to make it I'm going to add some yellow to it or some green and make it more greenish so that it's more analogous with this, right? I'm not, you know, I'm just sort of, like I said, I didn't rehearse this. I'm just sort of freewheeling it here. Usually, like if this were actually a painting that I'm working on, I'd go, huh, you know, what do I, I'd be maybe more calculating with it, but I want to be able to show you this, what you can do with a background. So I've got some green here, and I can do this a couple different ways. I could lay this over like I did when I did the black or the dark. So if I just go like this and I'm careful and I go like that, right? And I'm just laying it over. And this is even not really dry, and I'm able to do this as long as I don't work it, as long as I don't brush and brush and brush. You notice that I was brushing it pretty hard when I was bringing up the underneath layer. So that's one thing I can do. I can actually sort of tint it. I actually tinted it green. And then I could go, okay, well, I'm not happy with that. So I am going to get in here and I'm going to bring up what's underneath. But it still has a little bit of the yellow cast, but not as much. Then I go, oh God, I really don't like that. So I'm going to put a red in here. I told you I'm going to make a mess of this painting. So I'm mixing up some cadmium. I've got some other stuff in here because it was on my palette. So there's a little bit of white in there. It's not pure cadmium. I'm going to go, okay, well, it still feels like too much of a departure. It's probably going to make more of a brown. It might be horrible. In fact, it might be really horrible. Let's just see. I've got a little bit of the perline. And I go, it's not dry yet. It still has the sheen, but I'm just going, well, I really know I don't have to wait to see what it looks like. I really know that I want to change it. So it's already pulling up what's underneath here. But I've made backgrounds like this where I really liked the brush strokes that occurred. And a lot of times I'll play with the background just to create the brush strokes in the background and create that interest and to, you know, exploit it basically. And I might go, okay, I'm gonna make this lighter. There we go. So I've got kind of a vignette effect. So now I'm back to a violet, right? But it's a little bit darker. And then I can do what I did in here, and I can play around with these edges and manipulate them. So this has gotten, now this looks really dark in this edge. So it's not really working in with my painting. But if I come in here and paint these edges and paint over this dark, then this will start to work with that a little bit better. So let's see. So I'm rinsing out my big brush. Wiping it off here. And I'm picking up my flat, this flat that I showed you. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm wetting down my brush. I'm going to see how much I can get done here by reactivating, kind of blending this. Sometimes I even just take a big brush and I just go over everything to unify. But see how I'm like knocking down this dark. And really all I've done is I'm using the paint that's here and I'm not using, well, now I'm picking up some red. Picking up some red so that I can make it more of this mauve that's out here. Oops, need more water. Here we go. we go. So I'm manipulating these edges. Need more red. There we go. And now I have a darker background than I had, but it's still a mauve, kind of a mauve. I can come in here, pulling up what's underneath again. So the ability to reactivate what's underneath is a really useful tool. Right. Now, sometimes with a painting, if I feel like a painting's not working, and I decide to, I feel like I have nothing to lose, then I will absolutely do something really risky just to see if I can get the painting to be more interesting. So this is the kind of thing that I might do when I'm trying to get the painting to be more interesting. So letting it dry a little bit, because this is actually now pretty wet. I've worked over it without it drying for, a few times now. So I'm just going to let it, but let me be clear. I preferred the pale mauve to any of this. So just so you know, I just wanted to show you how you can reactivate and beat up a background and paint over a background again, and then reactivate it again, and manipulate edges, and then do something different even, so you can do so much with gouache, because you can. With acrylic, you would be painting over, because acrylic would be dry. With oil, you can do this because oil stays wet longer. So you can, wipe off, you can reactivate. With gouache, you would be soaking it off. And I try to avoid soaking off overall, because what that means is I'll take my big brush here, right? I've got my big brush. I'm gonna soak off this area here. So I'm running water onto this paint. And then I'm kind of agitating it with my brush gently to get it mixed with the water and kind of bring up the paint. And then I'm taking a paper towel and I'm dabbing and not rubbing with the towel. I don't want to abrade my paper board. I just want to pick up the paint. But if I abrade the surface of the paper, then it will show. And this is subject to being abraded pretty well, and it will already start to kind of pill if you're not careful. So that's basically soaking up. I could probably get away with doing it one more time here, wetting down some areas where the paint is still in layers. Take my paper towel again. And this is sort of a found paper towel that I had on my desktop. But I'm dabbing and not rubbing. And there I soaked that up. See, you guys have some glare. Looking at the glare. Yeah, you don't really have glare on this. It's pretty flat. So then I would want to let this dry and then paint over it. So by soaking it up, I risk abrading the surface, but then I don't have the reactivation problem which isn't really a problem. It's just, it's just something that I can use. But if I want to really change the color and I don't want to have the risk of reactivating, then I can soak it up. But now I want this to dry. so that I have the best opportunity to recoat it without problems. I'm going to say without problems, without reactivating any of this stuff along the edges, but also without causing it to pill. I don't want it to pill. So there, so I showed you how to soak it up. I've showed you how to reactivate. Now I'm going to say, okay, well, I don't like any of this. So I'm going to mix up my violet, my pale violet again, sort of something like it anyway, some facsimile of it. And then I'd like to recoat. I want to put it back to where it was. So I'm going to lay out a little bit more white because white is difficult to reactivate on my palette. It takes a long time for the white to really soak up water. It's a little bit resistant. And I would like to have, oh, there we go. There. I need the opacity. I need the opacity that is going to be created by using the color from the two. Okay, so mixing up this bluish color. Again, I haven't really used ultramarine blue in this very much. So kind of working my ultramarine blue. There we go. And picking up a little bit of red. Yeah, maybe that wasn't what I wanted. Oh, well. Okay. So now I have this pile of pale violet. So I'm feeling up my board here. This is still pretty cool. It's probably not quite dry as I would like. Like I would go off and do something and let this dry. It gives me my best chance to lay the paint over without reactivating anything, but I'm going to go ahead here. So, and I'm using the same method that I did with the dark. I'm not working the paint. So there I started to pick up because I brushed a little bit too much, but it's okay because I'll probably put another coat on. So it's nothing's a disaster here. And so because I'm impatient, I'm going to go ahead and paint over my area that I soaked up. And now I can go ahead and, so I'm a little bit more cavalier about working this because there isn't as much paint underneath there for me to reactivate. But I am going to have to make another coat when this dries. And then if I want to adjust the color a little bit, if I look at it and I think, oh, it really needs to be more, I'd like it to be a little bit more violet, you know, then I can adjust the color just a shade. But I wouldn't come in and work on any of these edges very much until I put my second coat of this on. Because it's just wasted effort if I finesse an edge and then I have to come in and put this big thing on with this big brush. But I can, I mean, it depends. If I want to put another coat on once this is dry and leave all the edges for a smaller brush, I can do that. That's going to take a few minutes to dry. So if you get a lot of paint on a background, a lot of layers, because I've done this. You get a lot of layers on a background, and you keep, coating it, because I've done it, then it will take longer to dry because you have more paint that's wet sitting there. You wet it and it kind of soaks into the layers, and then it takes longer to dry. Also, if you do something like I soaked this up, then the board actually gets wet. The board gets wet and it soaks up the water, and then it takes longer for this to dry. So now I can come in, because this is dry, so I can put my hand here, right? I can work on this. I can come in and play around with these edges if I want to, even while this is drying up here. Because if I put on another coat, I can put it on maybe a 1/4 inch away from the edge. I can come in and go. I want to soften this edge there. And soften this edge. Maybe I want to lose a little bit of an edge here and have it be really soft in a spot. Even softer. So what I just have to watch out for is putting my hand into the wet paint, which I almost just did, and then spreading it around, which I don't really want to do. So you just saw me go into the abyss and blow up a painting, basically, and basically mess it up and go, oh. And now I'm putting it back. Now, admittedly, you can't always, if you have nice textural effects that you really like, and you're going to lose those textural effects if you paint over them, then you can't always put all that stuff back the way it was. Then you have to just repaint it. And that's a drag, but certainly have done that. So I'm getting rid of the dark edge around this while I'm letting all this dry. Sometimes I'll take a blow dryer to it, but a lot of times I'll just go and do something else while I wait for it to dry. It looks like a real mess, that background. Hurry up. Pushing this thing over. There we go. going to fix this dark. I feel like it's, well, this would be fine if I make these other darks as dark. And actually with the lighter background, that might work. So I'm going to play around with some of these darks here while I'm waiting for all of this to dry. Let's see. So I'm going to use for that, I'm sorry, I'm going to realign things here. There we go. So for that, I'm going to use, what did I use? I'm sure that I used Perlene. And I need a clean bit of my palette. So I've got this dark and I've got this white. Wonder, can I use this dark? I think I can because I don't think there's white in this. So I'm making this dark using this greenish base that I used for the background. Let's see. I used kind of a yellow into that, but let's see if I can. Ooh, okay, a little too much Windsor Waha. And some Perlene, some Windsor Violet. Man, okay. Little too much Octane. Wow, so you can see actually on the palette how dark this is. Okay. Kind of a lot of Octane there. And now I need to neutralize it with Perlene. That's better. Okay. Okay. So I just mixed up this really dark, and I had my brush saturated with it. And so it might seem counterintuitive, but I didn't want to go into this painting with a big saturated brush full of paint. So I washed out my brush and I'm wiping it off right now. There we go. And I want to control how much paint is on my brush, basically. I don't want to go in here and have it be all clunky and saturated. So I'm going to darken this. See, and that dries quickly. So I'm going to see how that looks compared to this here. Maybe I need more Perlene in here to neutralize that bluish. Okay. Now it looks dark. And I'm going to come over here and darken this for good or ill, because, you know, this is sort of a big shape right here, and I don't really want to turn it into a big dark, something that's too big and dark, but I'm going to just step into this. Yeah. And just because I have the time, I'm going to come over here and darken that. That. Whoops. There we go. This here. So now this is holding together a little bit better, and I can see that I can soften and darken this edge a lot more and this also, so that it integrates a little bit better. Like the photo, if you see the photo, you can see how this is a little bit darker and this is too. So come out here and go there. So I'm gonna take a transparent watered down version of this dark and go over this, which will, let's see. Because this is sort of sticking out and popping forward. A little bit more than I got there. There. And I can do this multiple times, as long as I don't get things too saturated. And build up what I want. Here. So my background is still wet. So that tells you that shows you how long it takes to dry when when you've been working on it for a while and things get saturated. Still a little bit wet in here, still has a little bit more to go. But you can see just a little bit of brush stroke going on here. Dust, okay. And maybe in here. And in here. So I'm going to try to put another coat onto this background. And then we'll end class. Let's see, come on. Sorry, I'm just checking my tablet here, checking the time. So even though this isn't completely dry, I'm going to go ahead and recoat it. And I'm going to have to mix a little bit more paint. And I'm going to just get the color close because it doesn't actually have to be exactly perfect. But yeah, it is ideal if you are clever, and I'm not always clever, to mix a big pile of paint that's the same color, like that you would use the same pile of paint and you wouldn't be mixing more, especially if you're worried about subtle shifts in the color, because a lot of times you can't get it exact. But I'm not really worried right now, so I'm just gonna make this and this. All right, so I kind of have this color mixed up, a pretty decent bunch of it. Squeezing off a little bit of the extra paint. Here I go. And I can always put a third coat on. I still need to get some more coverage. Okay. There we go. Okay, so back from the brink. My painting is back from the brink. And so I feel like I'm done with this tulip painting. Excuse me. I'm not done with it. It's not a finished painting, but I mean, in terms of a demonstration, I think I'm done with it. So next week, we will work on this painting. And this is pretty complicated. I transferred mine in case we were going to use it. You can see my transfer. This is sort of backwards, by the way. So here's her face, here's her hair. And yes, with the tracing paper, anything that's dark pretty much drops out. So I usually leave dark areas. You know, I don't really necessarily go into the detail in the dark areas, and I just trace the details that I can see through the tracing paper. Because we're going to be drawing, I mean, we're just going to have to redraw things, but the tracing and the transfer is enough to give us landmarks. It gives us the shape of her face, you know, the patterns of her shirt, and the general large shape so that we can draw and extrapolate from there, rather than having it be, you know, slavish tracing. So next week, probably we'll be using more opaque paint on this next painting. Okay. So any questions, ladies?
Don't think so. I traced it this morning. It was a lot of detail.
It is a lot. It's a complex image because of the shirt.
Yeah.
But with time, you know, if you guys do more paintings with where you're tracing a photo, and then you might have a photo that's complex like this, there are ways where you don't have to be too exact with your tracing. Like with the shirt detail, I just put down certain guidelines because I'm going to be drawing with my when I'm in there painting, I'm going to be drawing. I'm going to switch this. There we go. There we are. Hi. I'll move this out of my way. There we go. As I'm painting, I'm going to be drawing and making changes and adjustments. And I feel relatively confident that I can paint the detail of her shirt. And the thing is, too, that it doesn't have to be exact. Especially with a pattern, you can kind of generalize the pattern. So I'm not too worried about it being exact. And so that makes me a little bit more cavalier with my tracing than probably you were. Yeah. But it was a lot of tracing. You're right. So you got it done. So now you don't have to do it this week.
Yeah.
All right. So I will see you next week. We will work on that painting. We'll look at a few more things maybe in screen share, talk about some other stuff. And if you have anything you want to show me for us to look at screen share, if you have a painting you're working on, or even this demo, if you want to ask some questions, feel free to take a shot of it and email it to me, and I'll put it up on screen share so we can talk about it. Okay. All right. So I will see you next Saturday. Have a good day. Have a good Saturday.
Yeah, you too.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome.